All right, so let's take a look at some of your homework problems on page 418, 31 to 49. So what I'll do, it looks like there's 3 sections. Maybe I'll do 2 from each section. Okay, so for the first section, it gives us a triangle, looks like this. And we have an angle here. This would be 12 and this would be 5. So this hypotenuse is 13 using Pythagorean theorem. And I'll do a couple from each section. So maybe I'll do 31. It asks us to find the cosine of theta over 2. And then I'll do 35, which asks us to find the cosecant of theta over 2. We don't have to worry about the plus or minus because it's not an actual angle in a coordinate plane. It's just a triangle. So looking at the formulas here, the cosine of theta over 2 would be 1 plus the cosine of theta divided by 2. And then when we go to do cosecant, remember that's 1 over the sine of theta over 2. So we'll find the sine of theta over 2, which is 1 minus the cosine of theta over 2, and then we'll flip it. Let's do one at a time. This is going to be 1 plus the cosine, 12 over 13 divided by 2. 1 plus 12 over 13 is, let me see here. Well, it's really 13 over 13 plus 12 over 13 is 25 over 13. And right here we're dividing by 2. So instead of saying dividing by 2, I'm going to write multiplying by 1/2. This gives us the square root of 25 over the square root of 26. And rationalizing gives us 5 root 26 over 26. That would be our answer for sine. For the cosine, now let's take a look at this other one. We're going to be doing 1 minus the cosine divided by 2. And if we convert this to a fraction, 1 minus 12 over 13, that's 1 over 13, which we're dividing by 2. Or we could write times 1/2. And this would give us 1 over 26, square root of that, which is 1 over root 26. Now we could rationalize, but remember I had asked you for a cosecant. So if that's what the sine is, then the cosecant of theta over 2 would just be square root of 26 over 1. All right, let's take a look at a couple problems in the next section. All right, so it's asking you to find the exact value of sine and cosine and tangent for these angles. I asked you to skip 41. Let's do number 43, which was pi over 8. Pi over 8 is 22.5 degrees, which is the same thing for a half angle as 45 degrees over 2. And then number 45, saying 3 pi over 8. 3 pi over 8 is 67.5, which is the same thing as 135 over 2. All right, so we're going to be finding the sine of 45 over 2, cosine of 45 over 2, and the tangent of 45 over 2. All right, now when we're doing this, we have to figure out if it's going to be a positive or negative. And remember, we're really taking the sine of 22.5. That's in quadrant 1. So all of these problems are going to be positive. Tangent, we have to figure out which formula you want to use. It doesn't matter which one out of the 3. So the formula is going to be, for sine, it's going to be 1 minus the cosine of 45, which is root 2 over 2, all divided by 2. For cosine, it's going to be 1 plus the cosine divided by 2. And for tangent, it doesn't matter which formula we use. I'll use 1 minus the cosine over the sine. All right, so now we just have to simplify and figure out what it is. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do here is I can multiply the top and bottom by 2, or what I could do is I could take the whole top and multiply by 1 over 2. It doesn't matter how you choose to do this. I'm just going to multiply top and bottom by 2 here, which gives us the square root of 2 minus root 2 over the square root of 4. That would be the answer for sine. Over here, I'm going to multiply by 2 over 2, which gives us the square root of 2 plus root 2 all over the square root of 4. And then this last one's going to be a little bit weird. I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 2 over 2, which gives us 2 minus root 2 over root 2. And if we rationalize, we get 2 root 2 minus the square root of 4 over 2, which simplifies to just negative 1 plus root 2. If you use the other formulas, that's what it'll simplify to also. Now for 67.5, we're going to do the same thing. We'll find the sine of 135 over 2, the cosine of 135 over 2, and the tangent of 135 over 2. Now 135 is right here with a 45-degree reference angle, so this would be negative 1, 1 and root 2. So let's use the same formulas here. We know that we're going to be taking the sine, cosine, and tangent of really this angle. That angle's in quadrant 1. So all of sine and cosine are definitely going to be positive. And let's go ahead and figure out what this would be. This would be the square root of 1 minus the cosine, which would be negative root 2 over 2, divided by 2. Cosine would be 1 plus the cosine over 2. And then the tangent, looking at my formula, maybe I'll pick a different one. I'm going to say it's going to be the sine of 135. I'm going to be using this one, the sine of 135 over 1 plus the cosine of 135. So the sine of this angle would be root 2 over 2. 1 plus the cosine would be negative root 2 over 2. So now let's simplify these fractions and see what we come up with. I'll multiply by 2 over 2 here. This gives us square root of 2 plus root 2 all over the square root of 4. It's not pretty, but that's what it is. If we multiply by 2 over 2 here, we get 2 minus the square root of 2 over the square root of 4. And then this last one, if we multiply top and bottom by 2 over 2, this gives us root 2 over 2 minus root 2. And then to finish, we would conjugate and multiply by the conjugate, right? So this would be 2 plus root 2 over 2 plus root 2, which gives us 2 root 2 plus root 4 over, this would be 4 plus 2 root 2 minus 2 root 2 minus the square root of 4, which is 2 root 2 plus 2 over 4 minus 2 is 2. And if we divide, we get the square root of 2 plus 1. Usually we would put the square root at the end here. So this is what this answer would be. So those are those problems. And we'll take a look at the last ones here. It says find the exact value of sine, cosine, and tangent using half angles. I had asked you to do up to 49, so for number 47, the problem says we know sine of U. U is in quadrant 2. And we know that the sine of U is 5 over 13. So this would have to be negative 12 using Pythagorean theorem. And then number 49. Number 49, it says we're in quadrant 3, or quadrant 4. And tan of U is negative 8 over 5. So the 5 would have to be negative, and 8 squared plus 5 squared is 89. This would have to be the square root of 89. Okay, so let's finish this by finding the sine, cosine, and tangent. So the sine, and let's see, what does it say here? So we know that this angle, let's see here. Find the exact value of sine of U and using the half angle formulas. So we're going to be finding the sine of U over 2. Okay, let's copy and paste these. Now, in order to find the sine of U over 2, it says that angle U terminates in the second quadrant, right? So if this is going to be our angle where U terminates, U over 2 is what we're finding. U over 2, if you pick any angle in quadrant 2, say like 100 degrees, so say that U is 100 degrees. It doesn't tell us what it is, but we know it terminates in quadrant 2. If we're going to be finding the sine of U over 2, that would be 50 degrees. Or any angle in quadrant 2, if you take half of that, it's in quadrant 1. So that means that our cosine and our sine values are definitely the positive square root. It's a little tricky to figure that out. I hope I explained that okay. And the tangent will just be using the formula. So let's figure this out here. So the sine of U over 2 would be 1 minus the cosine, which would be negative 12 over 13, divided by 2. The cosine would be 1 plus the cosine, divided by 2. And tangent, I'm just going to use the formula 1 minus the cosine, divided by the sine. So let's simplify these here. On top, this is just the square root of, let's type this into my calculator, 1 plus 12 over 13 divided by 2 is 25 over 26, which would give us 5 over root 26. If we multiply by root 26 over itself, we would get 5 root 26 over 26. For the cosine, 1 minus 12 over 13 divided by 2 is the square root of 1 over 26. Multiply by root 26 over itself, we get root 26 over 26. And then for this last one, I'm just going to type this in. 1 minus negative 12 over 13 divided by 5 over 13. And this just comes out to be 5. Those would be the answers for number 47. And then for 49, let's see what this would be here. So we are in the third quadrant. So if you take the fourth quadrant. If you take the fourth quadrant, any angle in the fourth quadrant, say 300 degrees. So say this angle right here is 300. 300 divided by 2 is what we're taking the sine, cosine, and tangent of. So 300 divided by 2 is 150, which puts us over here in quadrant 2. Well, the only thing that's positive there is sine. Cosine would be negative, and tangent we could just use one of the formulas. So let's figure out, now that we know what sine we're going to be using, let's figure out what this would be. So the formula for sine is 1 minus the cosine, which would be, let's see here, it's negative 1 minus the cosine is negative 5 root 89 over 89, all divided by 2. That'll be interesting, simplifying. Cosine would be the square root of 1 plus the cosine, negative 5 root 89 over 89 divided by 2. And then for the tangent formula, it doesn't matter which one we use. I'll use 1 minus the cosine divided by the sine. Okay, so let's see if we could simplify this here. All right, so I'm going to pretend like we're going to be, instead of dividing by 2 here, I'm going to treat this as, instead of taking the whole top and dividing the whole top by 2, I'm going to multiply the whole top by 1/2. That'll take care of this. So let's see what that is here. This would be the square root of 1/2 plus 5 root 89 over 89 times 2 is 178. Getting a common denominator, 178, I think it would just be 178. So I'd have to multiply the 2 by 89 over 89, which would be 89 plus 5 root 89 all over 178. And then we can multiply the top and bottom by the square root of 178. It's not pretty, but what that gives us is 89 square root of 178 plus 5 root 89 times 178 is 15,842 over 178. That would be the answer. Alright, let's take a look at the cosine now. Cosine, we're going to be doing the same thing. Instead of dividing by 2, I'll just multiply the whole top by 1/2. And this gives us negative the square root of 1/2 minus 5 root 89 over 178. Getting a common denominator would give us negative square root of 89 minus 5 root 89 over, let me see here, the square root of 178. And then if we multiply top and bottom by the square root of 178, we get negative square root of 89 root 178 minus 5 root 15,842 all over 178. Okay, and then one last one here. Let's see if we could simplify this. This would be 1 this would be 1 plus 5 root 89 over 89. We're going to be multiplying the reciprocal of 89 over 8 square root of 89. These cancel. We get 1 plus 5 root 89 divided by 8 root 89. If we multiply by square root of 89, that would get rid of our radicals in the denominator. And this would give us the answer, the square root of 89 plus 5 times 89 all over 8 times 89. Or a final answer of 445 plus the square root of 89 all over 712. All right, so that was fun. Stay tuned for today's lesson.